Today on Upfront, is it time to log off from an increasingly scandal-plagued Facebook? I'll ask iconic tech pioneer Jaron Lanier. And is the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia really going to execute the country's most famous cleric? I'm Mehdi Hassan. We've all heard about the Saudi Crown Prince's alleged involvement in the murder of a Saudi journalist. But what about the clerics and activists he's rounded up at home? I'll speak to the son of imprisoned Saudi Sheikh Salman al-Awdah. But first, with Facebook in the news again for failing to grapple with Russian meddling, illegal data sharing and hate speech, is it time to just log off? The author of the recent book, 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now, certainly thinks so. This week's headliner from New York, author, virtual reality pioneer and iconic computer scientist, Jaron Lanier. Jaron Lanier, thanks for joining me on Upfront. The New York Times just published a bombshell report revealing that Facebook knew about Russian meddling in the US elections, failed to penalize then presidential candidate Donald Trump for posting racist content, compromised its users' data privacy and tried to smear its critics as anti-Semites. To quote from the Times headline, Facebook's strategy was to delay, deny and deflect. You know Facebook. I'm sure you've probably interacted with Mark Zuckerberg. Does any of that surprise you? What's your reaction to this report?
I'm not entirely surprised by the report, although some of the details are surprising and shocking. I think from the Facebook point of view, or from Zuckerberg's point of view, he is always in what he perceives as a life or death struggle. Either Facebook controls the world or it dies. He doesn't perceive any kind of in-between outcome. And so therefore, there's a kind of an ethic of anything at all is allowed because it's either survival, total domination or total death. And so if you perceive this all or nothing world, which I think is a false perception, then you lose all sense of proportion, obviously.
And given the crises plaguing Facebook, which go back to the 2016 US election and beyond, are Mark Zuckerberg, the chair and CEO, and Sheikh Salman, the COO, are they still the right people to be running Facebook right now, or is it time for them to step aside?
Well, one of the peculiarities of Facebook is that it's the only public corporation that's large and is effectively controlled by one person. And it's, in a sense, that's an oxymoron. A public corporation should have a powerful board. It should have powerful shareholders. And the fact that there isn't governance is the first issue. That it's a one-man shop is really, really not okay. It's not okay for the world. It's not even in the spirit of capitalism. I think it's really anti-market. It's anti-democratic.
So he should step aside and make it more democratic and capitalist.
I think it would be good for the world if he stepped aside, but the point is that there's no mechanism for him to do so.
Last year, Mark Zuckerberg said Facebook's mission is to give people the power to build community and bring the world closer together. Given these recent revelations, given your own research in this field, do you buy that?
Well, you know, from my perspective, having participated in the creation of the Internet in the first place, it's the Internet that brought people together. And yet, whenever Facebook shows up somewhere, it seems to incite intercommunal bloodshed, because the very way it functions is by grabbing people's emotions, and the easiest ones to grab are the negative ones, the fight or flight emotions. And so it tends to raise passions and then put those raised passions into this cycle until they become ever worse, and then you start to have the Rohingya crisis, yes, crises in South India, crises in rural Africa. So we see bizarre, thuggish powers coming into play that are displacing democracy in countries as different as Sweden and Brazil. What else do they have in common other than Facebook? That's, you know, that's all they have in common.
And WhatsApp, of course, in Brazil, which is owned by Facebook. It's interesting you raised the issue of the Rohingya and the ethnic cleansing. The New York Times did draw attention to that in their piece and say Facebook ignored people who warned them about ethnic cleansing and their role in it. The 2016 election, of course, has really brought this argument to the fore about Facebook's role in politics, as it were. There's been a lot of debate and controversy over it. Facebook say these allegations are untrue, they're inaccurate about their role in the elections and whether they knew about Russian meddling, etc. Do you believe there is evidence to suggest that Facebook had a measurable impact on the outcome of the US presidential election, on the outcome of the Brexit referendum? Did it actually change votes?
I would say there's enough strong evidence and enough consensus of enough people with enough different, well-intentioned and well-informed perspectives that we should finally just say what the American intelligence establishment has said and what many others have said is that yes, Facebook did change the outcome of the American election. And Facebook's property, WhatsApp, did change the outcome of the Brazilian election. Probably played a role in Brexit, probably played a role in many other events in the world in recent years.
Wow. And it's interesting, you say that the problem is much broader than Facebook. It's social media itself. You say that there are 10 arguments for deleting your social media accounts right now. That's the title of your book. So we don't have time to get into all 10. What are your top 2 arguments for why people watching this interview should get off of social media?
Well, I would say, first of all, there could be some good form of social media. The problem with social media right now is that it's designed to manipulate you. And so if you enjoy free will, if you enjoy being an honest person in the world, you should not be using present-day social media. The business model of Facebook and other companies like Twitter is anytime you connect with another person, that's financed by some third party you don't know about who's trying to manipulate you in some sneaky way. So it's this giant manipulation machine by design. Every penny they earn was earned because somebody thought they could manipulate somebody else. Another one is the 10th argument, which is the spiritual one, which is there's effectively a new religion that's being promoted by Facebook and some of the other tech companies, which is that people are just information machines. We're modules, and we're all being connected together into a giant computer through these companies, and this giant computer will be this super intelligent AI that'll be better than humanity and will inherit the world. And so it's essentially a new kind of religion. And if you practice an existing religion, or if you're an atheist, whatever you are, you're gradually being sucked into this other tech religion, and it's a crappy religion. I mean, it's a silly religion, and you might not be aware of it because it happens gradually. And so I'd ask you to examine very carefully whether you're buying into this this bizarre new way of thinking. And if you want to learn more about that, you can find it in the book.
And just to check, Jaron, do you practice what you preach? Do you participate in any social media yourself?
Oh, God, no. I would never have an account on one of those things. I do fine without any account on Facebook or Twitter or any of the rest of them. You actually don't disappear if you delete your accounts.
Some people might say that if everybody in the Arab world, for example, had listened to your advice in 2010, 2011 and deleted their social media accounts, we wouldn't have had some of the revolutions in the Middle East. We may not have had the Arab Spring because in many ways those revolutions in Egypt, in Tunisia, they've been dubbed the Facebook revolution, the Twitter revolution. That's what they've been called.
Yeah, so here's what happens. Every time somebody uses platforms like Facebook and Twitter to affect positive social change, where they're saying, well, we can make our country better, we can achieve this or that, the algorithms in the background take whatever those people have done and they broadcast whatever information those people have given, the text, the images, everything, and they're looking for engagement from the broad population. And what they do is they discover where the most engagement is, and the most engagement is inevitably with those people who are inflamed by it, and then those people who are angry and irritated, scared, whatever, they'll zoom in on them, and then they'll incite it, introduce them to each other, and then the whole tool will refine itself for the most engagement, which inevitably is with the people who are the most angry, the most insecure, the most jealous, the most afraid, and then it becomes a tool for those people, and suddenly what you have is an ideal recruitment tool for ISIS. So you start with something that helps the Arab Spring, you end up with something that's optimized for ISIS.
You say that these are not just social media companies, they are behavior modification empires, and that we, the users, our behavior is turned into an empire for rent. A lot of people say you're questioning free will. You're saying that we're actually lost our ability to make free choices. We've been so duped. Is there actual evidence for that? Because a lot of people say, well, actually, no, it's fashionable to say we're addicted, but we're not really addicted to social media. Researchers at UNICEF, researchers at Oxford University have said, you know what, we're actually not addicted to social media in the way that you say we are in your book.
Well, the last person who can recognize an addiction is the addict, right? And so from a technical point of view, social media addiction is similar to gambling addiction. And if you've ever talked to somebody with a gambling addiction, you'll see the same things. Oh, I'm not addicted. I just know how to be lucky. I have a system. And it's a very similar process. Facebook's own published research that went through academic peer review shows that they can alter people's emotions without the people understanding and being able to be consciously aware that Facebook did it to them. There was a famous study in which they made masses of people sad without those people's consent, and nobody understood that it was happening to them. To say that you can be aware of that is a fool's game. You cannot be. We know that you cannot be.
And just to be clear, of the 5 big tech companies, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, you say it's Google and Facebook that are doing the most damage to our behavior and our lifestyles, not Amazon, which has been in the news this week for lots of criticism over the way it's got money out of governments, Apple, Microsoft. You say it's Google and Facebook. Is that right?
Well, look, there are plenty of reasons to criticize Amazon, Microsoft, and Facebook. And for full disclosure, I have a relationship with Microsoft now. And for even fuller disclosure, I've sold a company to Google. I actually really like big tech companies. I'm not sort of anti-corporate or anti-tech companies. However, what distinguishes Google and Facebook is that they rely almost solely on the manipulation machine for their money. They don't have any diversification. They're absolutely addicted to it, like petrostates are addicted to oil. And so it does, in my view, corrupt them. Now, the things I'm talking about, these manipulations, all the tech companies engage in them to some degree, but not totally. So there might be additional reasons to criticize the other tech companies. There probably are. But as far as this particular issue of running a mass mental manipulation machine for profit, that's really Google and Facebook. And then a few smaller companies like Twitter.
You make the argument very strongly in your book. You're making the argument very eloquently today. But do you worry that your connection to Microsoft, which you said, full disclosure, you've been a researcher at Microsoft, do you think that undermines your argument, that you're part of one of the quote-unquote rivals? You're part of one of the companies that you're saying isn't as bad as Google and Facebook. Does that undermine you in some way?
Well, I love Silicon Valley. I'm a creature of it. And I want us to be better. And I feel that being a loyal opposition, being able to say what we're doing is wrong, we need to change, is my duty. And I used to be rather lonely doing this. There weren't too many others, but in recent years, it's actually become much more acceptable and common for people in the tech industry to criticize the tech industry, and I think it's enormously healthy. So I don't think we should rely on people like me who are within the tech industry to be the sole critics or the sole agents of change. That would be a problem. But I think it's crucial that there be people inside the industry willing to call the truth.
But as an industry insider, as someone who was there for the start of the internet, and you say you love Silicon Valley, you want to see it improve. On the one hand, some people will say, your supporters will say, see, even Jaron Lanier is saying this, and he was there from the beginning. He knows it inside out. Others might say, hold on, that makes Jaron Lanier a hypocrite because he made his name in this field. He made his money out of it. And now he's criticizing everyone else who's still in the business.
You know, I was one of the earlier people to criticize what we're doing. I started writing critical essays about this. I wrote an essay in '92 saying if we keep on going where we're doing, there might someday be these bots that would do battle with each other to influence people and could throw an election. So, I mean, I've been worried about this for a long time. Does it make me a hypocrite for sticking with it? Possibly. But you know what? If that's so, use what I'm saying to your benefit. Read the arguments. If they're helpful, if you find any power from them, use them. I really don't, who cares if I'm a hypocrite? I'm just one person. I'm not running for office. I'm not asking you for anything. What I can give you is a perspective that you won't get from many other places of how an insider saw us make these terrible mistakes. And that's what I can offer you.
Jaron Lanier, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me on UpFront.
Thank you so much for having me.
The New York Times reported this week that shortly after journalist Jamal Khashoggi was assassinated in Turkey, a member of the Saudi kill team instructed a superior over the phone to tell your boss. That boss is believed to be Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who back at home continues to crack down on his critics. One such critic is the prominent Muslim cleric Sheikh Salman al-Awdah, who's been held in solitary confinement for opposing the government and is now facing a possible death sentence. Joining me to discuss his situation is his son, Abdullah Alaoudh, a Saudi citizen who is now living in the United States and fears returning. He's a senior fellow at Georgetown University's Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding. Abdullah, thanks for joining me on UpFront.
Thank you for hosting me.
The Saudi authorities had your father imprisoned last year and charged with over 35 different crimes, including corrupting the land, connection to a terrorist organization, and offending patriotism. What's your response to the Saudi authorities and to those charges?
Well, it's the same rogue operation is going on actually for dissidents abroad, for those who disagree at home, for journalists, economists, public figures in general. So my response is that the charges actually represent how the state would crack down on any different view on any person who disagrees.
And Saudi prosecutors in September of this year called for your father's execution too. Do you think they're serious about that they would really execute a cleric as prominent as your father, Salman al-Awdah?
Well, do you think those who went to the Saudi consulate were serious to take the life of the prominent journalist and veteran Saudi Jamal Khashoggi? It's the same mentality. It's a pattern. It did not start with my father. Did not start with Jamal Khashoggi. It's a pattern that we have seen through the past 1.5 years since the Crown Prince came to power. They did everything in their power to just silence others, to crack down on dissent, to just do impulsive policy.
You say it's a pattern. Some might say, yes, it is a pattern, and your father was arrested, imprisoned, punished by the Saudi authorities in the past, too, in the 1990s, when he was a quote-unquote Islamist, rabble-rouser, his critics said. Many would say that's why he's being imprisoned. It's nothing to do with MBS. The Saudi government, under any prince or king, has always taken a very dim view of people who oppose the government. Is that fair?
It's true. Tyranny is always tyranny. Trying to ask and demand political reform is never something that you should be punished for. Political reform that my father and others pushed for is actually the solution, is actually the path towards stability.
Okay. We'll come back to the political reform in a moment. Just to confirm, many say your father was arrested in September 2017 because he refused to publish a tweet to his 14 million followers at the request of the Saudi government that supported the Saudi-led blockade of Qatar, which, full disclosure, owns this channel, owns Al Jazeera English. Is that true?
It's the trigger. It's true, because after he tweeted, when he heard about the reconciliation between the Qatar and the Saudi government, he tweeted, "May Allah reconcile between their hearts for the better of their people." A few hours after that tweet, he was arrested. That was the trigger. That's, of course, the direct reason that he was arrested in September 2017. But there is a long history and relationship.
And just to be clear, before we get to that long history, was your father being paid by the Qatari government or anyone else in Qatar? Because that's another accusation sometimes thrown against him by supporters of the Saudi government.
He is never paid. And you know what? If he was at any point paid by the government or was conspiring with any foreign agent, they would have a lot of evidence to prove. They would show it in the state. They have all his accounts.
So far.
They didn't show anything. If you read the justice memorandum against him and the charges, it's just preposterous. Yeah.
When Mohammed bin Salman told Bloomberg last month that 1,500 Saudi citizens were arrested over the last 3 years because he, the Crown Prince, was trying to, quote, get rid of extremism and terrorism without a civil war, a lot of people, especially in the West, will hear that and say, he's got a fair point. They've seen hate preachers, extremist clerics coming out of Saudi Arabia for years, and they think, fair enough if the prince wants to lock some of these people up to try and shut down extremism. What's your response? to people who say
well,
that?
actually, it's not accurate. He is curtailing, he is attacking the very moderate voices that actually spearheaded the campaign against terrorism for the past 2 decades. My father, for example, was the one who called a spade a spade. He pinpointed terrorism, and he called it, and he demanded justice against all terrorists in Saudi Arabia. He was actually spearheading the campaign, really, along with the state at that time. At that time, the state benefited from all his campaign and his efforts.
Your father has spoken out against terrorism, as you say, including against the 9/11 attacks, against Osama bin Laden himself. But the fact is that he was once a hero of bin Laden's. The late al-Qaeda leader even cited your father, Salman al-Awdah, as his ideal personality. He praised your father for enlightening Muslim youth. You accept, surely at the very minimum, that whatever he says now, he was once a quote-unquote extremist.
Well, you know what? In the 80s, bin Laden liked so much the royal family, and he was very close to them. Those who actually gave all the platform, those who pushed the jihadi agenda at that time, those who ran the show at that time, those who should be responsible. My father was a popular cleric. Yeah. He was admired by everybody. The royal at that time, he was respected by the royal family, by the people, by different factions.
Just to be fair and get our facts right, when bin Laden had turned against the Saudi government, when he'd already carried out the World Trade Center attacks, and he published his famous fatwa against Americans and foreign invaders, etc., in the mid-90s, he was still praising your dad.
No, he is not. He's actually just using my father's popularity to get into his audience.
And your father was never a fan of bin Laden's?
No, he was never a fan of bin Laden. He did not even consider bin Laden a scholar or a sheikh.
But he clearly, Salman al-Awdah, has evolved in his views over the years, I think it's fair to say.
Of course, but he was never violent.
Fine. So he was never violent, but he's evolved in his views, let's say, and these are very crude words, from a more conservative position to a more liberal position, I think Westerners would put it as.
Especially socially.
So socially, so on democracy, on non-Muslims, on sectarianism, on his attitudes towards gay people. Is it fair to say that if your father was left undisturbed by the government and able to preach and able to talk to his 14 million followers and tell them about his changing views, he could actually have a more reformist impact on the Saudi population than Mohammed bin Salman? Yes,
very true. And that's why Mohammed bin Salman attacked him, because he could pull the rug under the quote-unquote reformist agenda. It could expose the reformist agenda that the state now is saying it's pushing for.
So on Mohammed bin Salman and on Jamal Khashoggi and his gruesome death at the hands of this team of Saudi assassins in Istanbul, do you believe MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi Crown Prince, gave the order to kill Jamal Khashoggi?
Well, you know what? Who gave the Attorney General the order to seek death penalty against my father for similar views of that of Jamal Khashoggi's? Who actually, there are reports even of death under torture in Saudi prison while I'm speaking right now. Turki al-Jasir was reportedly dead under torture in Saudi Arabia. Sulaiman al-Dawish is also reportedly dead, but we're not sure about that.
So you believe the Crown Prince is responsible for these deaths and for Jamal Khashoggi's death?
Whoever ordered that, whoever oversaw that, will actually will be responsible for the death of Jamal Khashoggi.
Abdullah, when Jamal Khashoggi was on this show on UpFront back in March, he said he didn't, quote, want to be the next Salman al-Awdah, referring to your father being in prison at the time. Tragically, he ended up meeting a fate worse than your father's. Dare I ask, do you now worry what will happen to you? How much of a threat do you think there is against you as a Saudi citizen now living in the US, criticizing MBS and the Saudi authorities?
Well, at some point I thought it's very difficult for the state to use the long arm to reach dissidents abroad, and those even who did not present themselves as dissidents, like Jamal Khashoggi and me. But now, after what happened to Jamal Khashoggi, I think everyone is, I mean, the message actually the state sent is that everyone is threatened. Everyone, we can reach everyone everywhere. So it's very, very dangerous. And we have seen a pattern.
Have you had threats against you?
I got threats like every hour, not every day. On Twitter, I get threats from different parties. Yeah.
And I believe you have more than a dozen members of your family in Saudi Arabia who've been banned from traveling. Is that correct?
True.
So they can't come and see you and you can't go and see them?
Yes, true.
One last question, Abdullah. You've been here in the US since the summer of 2017, before your father's arrest back home in Saudi Arabia. Do you have any message for Donald Trump, for Jared Kushner, for John Bolton, for these hardcore supporters of MBS and the Saudi government here in Washington, D.C.?
Well, if we want to perpetuate a good relationship that lasts longer, and for the best interest of both parties, we should do that with the Saudi people, with the Saudi institutions. If one individual was impulsive, was really dangerous, there are many alternatives. We have seen that even within the royal family, there are so many royals who could understand the reformist agenda. The real reformist agenda could allow for a margin of freedom for the people, could protect the basic rights of the Saudi people. So what the MBS agenda and his team is producing is actually the environment that establishes, that could establish an environment for terrorists to flourish and to live.
Abdullah Alaoudh, will have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me on UpFront. That's our show. UpFront will be back next week.